Early in my career, I was working night shift on patrol. Right out of roll call, I went with my buddies to go grab a bite to eat. We ordered our food, but while we were waiting for it to come out, I was dispatched to an emergency call. A fight between a stepson and a stepfather. So I told my buddies to grab my food when it's ready, and if I got hung up on the call, to pack it up to go for me. I arrived at the scene and I was met by the mother and the son. The son told me something like, "Oh, he left already, we're good now," referring to the stepfather. I asked them what happened, and they said the son and the stepfather got into a fight. Mostly some yelling and shouting, but a little bit of pushing and shoving. I didn't see any injuries, so this call was looking more and more like a nothing burger. In Florida, cops generally don't have discretion when it comes to reporting domestic violence. And yes, a pushing and shoving match between a stepfather and stepson would very much qualify as domestic violence. Under normal conditions, I would have scratched out a two-liner, documenting what was reported and what I observed. But I was working without a laptop that night, so I would have had to drive all the way back to the station to type up the report on a desktop. But this was a BS call. They were calm. They said no one wants to press any charges. And more importantly, I was hungry and my food was getting cold. At this point in my career, I had seen plenty of cops, no report calls, way worse than this one. So I asked my backup officer to add the notes to the CAD and clear the call from his laptop. I told him to write, "No violence, subject GOA, no report." I got back to the restaurant and enjoyed my meal. About 20 minutes later, dispatch advises over the radio they're getting reports of a man admitted to the hospital with multiple stab wounds in his abdomen. They give the address of where it happened and my stomach drops. It's the stepfather. I respond back to the scene, but this time I'm now accompanied by two sergeants, and I've got some explaining to do. What followed was an aggravated battery investigation, as well as a few weeks of an internal investigation for neglect of duty. As a young 20-something-year-old cop, I tied my brain into knots trying to conjure up the logic to justify how this wasn't my fault. And it really wasn't my fault. Would writing a two-line report have retroactively prevented a stabbing? Of course not. So no, it wasn't my fault, but it was my responsibility to handle things by the book. Because the son began telling the investigators that he told me about the stabbing, which was nonsense. I wasn't that stupid. If I knew somebody was stabbed, I would have done things a lot differently. But because I wanted to play mental gymnastics on scene to categorize pushing and shoving as no violence, the damage was done and my credibility was shot. I think this is one of the most critical lessons young people, especially cops, need to learn. That just because something isn't your fault doesn't mean it's not your responsibility. Mark Manson talks about this, and he uses a brilliant example of someone leaving a baby at your doorstep. Of course it wasn't your fault, but it damn sure is your responsibility now. 999 times out of 1,000, a cop would handle a similar call just like this and never hear about it again. But I got a written reprimand for it, and it would go on to fundamentally transform how I looked at personal responsibility and accountability for the rest of my career.